I'm Angela Kennecke. Welcome to Grieving Out Loud. I'm working through the loss of my 21-year-old daughter, Emily, to fentanyl poisoning by talking to others who have experience with either addiction or grief or both. I'm learning so much from the guests on this podcast, and I really want people to know they are not alone.
When I was 14 and I was hurting from the divorce, a nurse gave me a little white pill.
That's what Susan Bartz Herrick's only child, Luke, told her years later. Luke was set up for addiction due to a number of factors while still in his teens. He had years of sobriety and accomplishments, but experienced setback after setback.
They did a welfare check, and then I got that phone call that no parent ever wants to get.
Susan lost 30-year-old Luke to fentanyl poisoning less than a year ago. She's speaking out and telling Luke's story, and will soon have a book out and potentially a film that chronicles his life and loss. Well, Susan, thank you so much for joining me to talk about Luke's story and all of the things that you're doing in his honor and to help sort of change the trajectory of this country and where we're headed with the overdose crisis. So I just want to, in advance, thank you for sharing Luke's story and for all that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Angela. And I thank you too, because it is because of your efforts we are being able to get all of this out to the public. And we have to change the public perception of what substance use disorder is. Thank you.
Yes, 100%. Well, let's dive right into your son Luke's story.
Okay.
I know Luke died in August of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So you are, a few years behind me in this whole grief process.
Yes.
But also Luke's journey was a long one and a very bumpy one.
Yes.
So can you just kind of start at the beginning of the story?
At the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know back in 1991 that there were some things called precursors to addiction, and that my son just came into the world with a handful of them. He was highly creative, very intelligent, but as the years went on, he had ADD, Tourette's. He was once misdiagnosed as bipolar, and all of these things are precursors. His father and I had a terrible divorce when he was about 10 years old. His father was a functioning alcoholic. I remember.
Well, I just have to stop you for 1 second because so many of those things are similar to my daughter, Emily. Highly creative. At one point in high school, they said maybe she has ADHD. We weren't really sure. I was divorced from her dad at age 8. It was a very difficult divorce. And her dad also suffers from substance use disorder. And I think that's so hereditary addiction, right? It comes on every family. Right. And we now know that addiction is 30 to 60% hereditary, just like asthma.
It is.
I have asthma.
Yes, it is.
So yeah.
Yes, it is.
But go on. So you went through this divorce, and how old was Luke when that happened?
Luke was 10. Mm-hmm. And now this was in the early 2000. And this is when the medical community was passing out Oxycontin like Pez. And everybody had bought into the lie that it was only 1% addictive. And between the ages of 14 and 17, he was prescribed Oxycontin 4 separate times. And of course, we trust our doctors. And, it's funny, he told me later on in life, I said, when did you start using drugs to medicate your pain? And he said, Mom, when I was 14 and I was hurting from the divorce, a nurse gave me a little white pill that made all my pain, not just my physical pain go away, but all my pain go away. And from that point on, it was on my radar.
Well, and also you have the developing brain there at that time too. It's not just these highly addictive substances, but his brain was still, and we know that sets kids up for addiction.
And against my mother's wishes, she was an educator and the founder of 2 schools for the gifted in the Chicago area. She said, do not give him Adderall because it will change how his brain grows. It will change the brain, and I argued with her because being a professor, I really didn't see any of the studies. And the studies that I did come across said, oh no, there's no problem. Well, later on, when I started digging into the studies, I saw that they were run by the pharmaceutical companies that made Adderall. He was on that. When he was misdiagnosed with bipolar, they started him on Depakote, Seroquel, lithium, and each one of those drugs just made his behavior bizarre. I mean, really even worse. Finally, I woke up and I fired the psychiatrist. I went to a psychologist and said, what's going on here? And that's when he told me. He said, he's not bipolar, Susan. He's highly creative, and very creative kids. They feel things so much stronger than
100%.
other people. And so, he's feeling intense grief, intense sadness. And the only way he knows how to deal with it is by numbing the pain, either through drugs or alcohol. But he is the one who turned us on to the drug Suboxone. And it was pretty new at that time. And
now, we should mention, in case some of our listeners don't know, that Suboxone is used to treat opioid use disorder. It ends the opioid receptors. So basically, if you take an opioid, you don't get high from it if you're using Suboxone. But people can also abuse Suboxone. So it has its positive and its negative points.
But, there were only 3 doctors in the state who could prescribe it, because you have to have the extra hours. I mean, the regulations on this drug, they're passing oxycodone on like Pez. And here, so few can give this drug. And, anything can be abused. You stay out in the sunshine too long, you're going to get a sunburn, but this drug worked wonders for Luke. And it got him really stable because he wanted to go to school.
How old was he at this time when he started Suboxone?
He was 17. So for a whole year, it was doing well. And he was starting to walk it off. His grandfather died shortly before his 18th birthday. And Luke went down to Florida to take care of my mother. An hour out, he was in a near fatal car accident. And he had 27 broken bones, lacerated liver, spleen. I mean, they did not know if he was going to live for 5 days. He was on a ventilator. He also severely broke his back. And so they had to put in 4 screws and 2 rods. But I remember leaving the hospital room one night and looking over in the corner to see the drug tree. And there were like 8 bags, fentanyl, morphine, and I knew at that moment that we might have a real rough road ahead. And we did. We were out of state when the accident happened, and he was let out on 200 milligrams of oxycodone, and they just told us to go find a doctor to take over his care. Well, so many doctors didn't want to touch him because that's when the laws were starting to tighten up. We did find one who believed in the breakthrough pain. Unfortunately, he escalated Luke up to 600 milligrams of oxycodone a day, which is end-stage cancer dosages. And we, as a family, we had to try to figure this out because we were not given any help or any guidance. And for 9 months, it was terrible. I finally was able to bring Luke home. He was hooked on the Xanax because they gave that to him for the PTSD. He remembered all of the accident as it happened, which was very traumatizing. He was trying to get off of the oxycodone. Sometimes he'd use alcohol to do that, which was not a good idea. My jewelry was starting to disappear. His things were. It was very tense at home. And I was afraid, if I let him out, that he would get killed, until one day I realized. I found a needle in his room, And I had had a friend who had walked in one morning to say good morning to her son, and she had found him passed away. And I just said, Luke, if you're going to die of this, I don't want to find you in our home. So this is your choice. I'm kicking you out of the house, no car, no money, no anything, or I am sending you to a 1-year treatment program as far away from North Carolina as I can find. Because one of the things I learned in order to help people recovery, as you well know, new playgrounds, new playmates, new play toys.
Yeah. They always say in drug court, people, places, things, right?
Right.
So, if you're triggered by the people you hang around and what where to go for the drugs, and it's very hard to remain in recovery if you're around the same people, places, and things. So did he go to the treatment center?
Yes, he did. And I tell you, that sobriety house changed my troubled, angry young man into a strong man of integrity and grace. And they gave him the skills to live a good life. Very important in this too. It was over a year, because he was a year in the house and then 90 days prior to that in the treatment center.
I have a question about this too, because I know you're not independently wealthy. And so to send him to a treatment center for a year, I mean, that had to be difficult financially.
I was very fortunate that my mother and stepfather paid that bill.
Oh,
yeah. Wow. They had the stocks, and they were very happy to be able to do that for him. But, you bring up a very valuable point. I felt very guilty many times because I knew what it took. At this time, I was starting to read the studies that say, 30 days, no wait, 60, 90. I mean, you have to have a long extended period, and it's for the brain to heal, for the receptors to lay down. And
here's the thing, I think a lot of people like me, you and I have higher education degrees and, higher education degrees. I know how to research things. You know how to research things. Like, we have the tools that some people don't necessarily have, yet this problem is so nobody can. I mean, in fact, I have a good friend who's a medical doctor, actually headed up a health system, and they had troubles with their daughter, and his wife is an educator too. And they couldn't figure out what to do or where to turn. It is such a hard thing to navigate in this country.
It is. And parents don't know. They go into the protective mode, which is natural, but you can't save anybody like that. You have to have the tough love. And of course, when they're adults, they have to make the choice. And the only way to do that is stop enabling. And that means by stop giving them everything. And this is where a lot of parents fall short, is they just don't feel they can. I mean, we have friends right now I've talked to numerous times. They will call when he is in crisis. I'll give them the numbers. I'll give them the places. They can afford it. They said, well, we've sent him to treatment before. And I said, for how long? Well, he was in for 30 days. That's not going to cut it.
Well,
however.
And ideally, our health systems would be set up to treat substance use disorder, the disease of addiction, a brain disease, in the same way we treat diabetes or heart disease or other. But we're not. I mean, the burden falls on the families.
Yes.
Even if you do go to one that where insurance, they take insurance. You're lucky if you have insurance, and then even then, it's a lot of money.
Right. And I'll get to our insurance problems a little bit after, this story goes on. He came out wonderful. He wanted to go away to college. Didn't know if it was a good idea because I liked him being out in LA, but I caved because I was looking at what I wanted for him instead of what was best for him.
Well, and it's hard to know in the moment always what the right thing. You can look back now and say, oh, I should have, maybe this is the course we should have taken, but to blame yourself for decisions you made at the time.
I let that go, but I want other parents to hear this because they're faced with the same thing, and to ask the question, is this what I want for them? or is this really in the best interest for them based on the knowledge that I have learned about the disease that my child has? Okay. He relapsed there. He came home. He went away 3 more months to a treatment center. Just, he just broke down and said, I don't want to live like this, but I need help getting back. So he was away for 3 months, really got into exercise. And, I found out some studies that strenuous exercise can really help relapses not happen because it builds up the endorphins, which have been decimated when the opioids have given them artificial.
I have another guest on my podcast that was in and out of prison, suffering from, horrible addiction for years. And exercise really has been the saving grace for him to stay in recovery. So, he's living proof of that kind of thing.
Yeah. Luke had a great life going out in LA. We were very happy. He relapsed once, started drinking when his father died, quickly got back on. And that's when I found out it's not unusual for somebody out of recovery to relapse. One article I read said 3 to 5 times for younger people because they think, I'm okay now.
Yeah.
Anyway, but in 2005, he started to complain of back pains. And I have to be honest, at first I thought, is this drug seeking behavior? But he did have this apparatus in his back. We had x-rays done. Nothing seemed wrong, but he said, no, my lower back, so I said, get an x-ray. A CT scan. And they had found that an IVC filter, which is a blood clot filter, it looks like a spider, was implanted in him during the accident, which can be standard protocol. And it had migrated and tipped sideways. So it was in his intestines, in his aorta, one of the prongs, and up against his spine. So I brought him home and we went to Duke Medical Center because they had these specialists there to take it out. And they tried the first surgery was just been going in through a vein, hook it and try to pull it out the same way that they had put it in. And that had failed. Now, I had talked to the medical staff prior. Luke agreed to let me come in. He had signed off on the HIPAA form. And I tried to get across to them, he has substance use disorder. You can't treat him the same way that you treat a normal patient. And Angela, I could see it was just going straight over their head.
That's horrible. That's horrible. Is it that do you think the medical, I really believe most doctors aren't trained enough in substance use disorder. They get like 1 day of training in medical school. It's like they need a lot more training, all doctors, to understand the implications.
You are so right. Out of the 5,500 hospitals in this entire country, only 18 offer Suboxone in the emergency room. Mm-hmm. Most doctors do not have a clue. The nursing staff and the PAs, they did not know what Suboxone was because when he came out of surgery, it failed. The first surgery failed. So they scheduled him for 2 weeks later. Well, we both went crazy. He had just been shot up with narcotics and they were just going to let him walk out and say, we'll give you a little Percocet. And, he said, Mom, 10 milligrams of Percocet, I was up to 600. And just being introduced to narcotics again, it just lights up all those receptors. I have a girlfriend who is an MD, and she got me into a pain clinic. And I talked to the doctor and I said, we need help. We need 2 weeks. And he called my son a hopeless drug addict, that his brain was permanently changed and that he would probably die and that I should stop enabling him before I killed him.
Wow.
Yeah. It was.
And I've heard other parents say in this journey involving mental health and substance use disorder that they have had horrible things like that said to them by medical professionals.
Yes.
Which is just, and that when someone of that kind of authority says something to you, and especially to your kid along those lines, it really does affect a person going forward.
Well, he asked Luke to leave before he told me that, but that pushed my hot button because I had done the research and he could, there were other options. He never looked at the charts. He never looked at anything. So Luke and I had to fend for ourselves, which we did. Second surgery was successful, but they had to open Luke up, and I don't mean to be graphic, but move his internal organs out of the way because the vena cava is in the very back, clamp it off, lung, heart.
This is major surgery, major
surgery. And, but beforehand, because I was a professor in the UNC system, I could break the firewall at Duke, and I found the head anesthesiologist. And I said, I've talked to my girlfriend who is an anesthesiologist, and she said there are certain drugs that will trigger and some that won't. And they were wonderful and laid out a protocol for Luke. They gave him a partial block. They couldn't give him a full one because of the burst T fracture that he had. But they were able to keep the morphine down as low as possible with other drugs like ketamine. The problem is, and then they ported him over to methadone, which is also a painkiller. And then we went over to the pain clinic, and just a wonderful pain management doctor there created a protocol to walk Luke down. We were taking about 6 different drugs that had to be given at different times. I mean, we had alarm sets and, everything laid out so we could walk him down off of all of this. And it took 6 weeks. We still found that he needed to go into a treatment center at the end of that because he had gotten addicted to the methadone. And he went back into that addict mode, and I had to pull together an intervention of family and friends. There was no counselor available, but I had known enough about how to do an intervention that after an hour time, he agreed he needed to go in for help. He went in for a month, came out. He was great. He decided to stay at a sobriety house for a couple months because they keep accountability of each other. And 3 weeks after that happened, he had an intestinal blockage, something they told us might happen because he had already
he can't catch a break. I feel like he cannot catch a break. The accident, and then the aftermath of that, and now an intestinal block. I mean, everything that could go wrong, hypothetically,
did. And so they shot him up with morphine and had an NG tube in. He couldn't eat anything, couldn't drink anything. 5 days later, they let him go once again without any medical assisted treatment, Suboxone. I had asked, they were clueless at the hospital. I brought Luke home, and he started to use this thing called Kratom tea, which I'm
familiar with Kratom. There's some controversy, surrounding Kratom. I've done a few stories as an investigative journalist about it, but I'm a little bit familiar with the substance.
It helped him for a short period of time, but because unlike Suboxone, which has a lid on it, Kratom doesn't. So he was starting to escalate, but then he had yet one more blockage after that. I called up the insurance company and I said, listen, he needs to go back into treatment and a medical detox. He's got totally off all opioids and he's just been shot up again. And they said, I'm sorry, we only offer that once a year. And I said, but he didn't go out to get high, okay? He was forced back on them because it's a very painful experience. It didn't make any difference. once again,
Well, I think it's very unfortunate that insurance companies often dictate what care someone will get, what kind of care. And, I just think it's so unfortunate that that happens, even if it's going against the advice of medical professionals.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I took out a third mortgage on the house because my mother had since passed away, and sent him back into a sobriety house for 6 months. He came out again, wonderful, dedicated to his program, very close to the AA community. It was very important to him to be connected to them. Made it 3 weeks short of his first year anniversary, where he had another blockage. This time,
another blockage?
Yes, a third.
Oh, wow.
He had the wherewithal to drive to the best hospital in town. I mean, he was in pain, and he collapsed in the ER because he knew if he could get to a good hospital, he only had Medi-Cal insurance, and knew if he ended up anywhere else, he'd be in trouble. And they kept him on an NG2 for a week and had him sign off on a colostomy because they didn't think that they would be able to save the colon. A new doctor stepped in at the 11th hour and said, "Hey, I want to try going in laparoscopically and see if I can untangle this." And luckily he did. And then he shaved the scar from the inside so it wouldn't adhere to the intestines anymore. But the problematic thing that happened after that, now he had been back on morphine for a week under painkillers for the fentanyl for the surgery. And then he was let off on Tylenol. His cravings were so high, he went back to his tea to try to help. But his AA team told him, "You can't be on anything. So since you went back on tea, you have lost all of your time, and you cannot come back to our group until you're totally off everything." That so shocked me. Luke was so devastated. He ended up in a psych ward on suicide watch. I mean, he had pretty much had it. I brought him home.
I do think like those groups can be so important to people because we always hear connection is the solution to addiction. And so we had that connection to these people and felt, I suppose, alone. I mean, he'd been through so much physically.
Yes.
Wow.
You brought up, this point here, Angela, is very important because AA was started in 1936.
Well, my grandpa started it in Southwest Minnesota, started the chapter there back in the 50s, so I know a little bit about it. And there are,
I mean, it works well, but it has not kept up with the science. And, for the past 2 years, all we have been hearing on the news is follow the science, in regards to COVID. And yet the medical community and AANA, they have not followed the science, which is out there. Unfortunately, it is in medical journals and things that most lay people cannot read without help. But the science says that there are a lot of people who are dual diagnosis, meaning they have mental health issues, general anxiety disorder like my son, depression, that need pharmaceutical intervention. We wouldn't take insulin away from a diabetic and say, no, you just have to eat right. And we wouldn't deny chemo from someone with cancer, saying, well, you can't go to any support groups unless you're not on chemo. And yet that's still how classic AANA still works. They don't allow you to go to the meetings, or NA allows you to go to the meetings, but you cannot participate. I asked Luke and I said, why don't you just go, but not tell them that you're on it? He said, because that goes against the principles of the integrity of what these programs stand for. So, I mean, it was a real catch-22 situation. But Luke came home in 2017, and he decided to get back into exercise and to take up the game of golf, which he did when he was younger. And at first he said, Mom, the screws, I can't swing. And I told him, change your
Because of his
swing.
back surgery.
Right.
Right.
So I told him, change it because, there's a lot of people that have problems. They just have to have a different swing. Well, that is all it took. And quite honestly, golf became his new addiction. He had to be out
A
there.
healthier addiction, a much healthier addiction.
Oh, right. I mean, he had to be out there every day. But what the golf did is it helped his body to create those endorphins that he so needed.
Mm-hmm.
And for 3.5 years, I mean, he was just on fire. He finished his associate's degree in political science. He came to me one day and said, Mom, guess what? I put in an application to the University of Pennsylvania. I said, Luke, that's an Ivy League school. He said, yeah, but they have this online program, especially for students like me. And I thought, okay, well, son of a gun, he got in. And his essay to get in was about his struggles with substance use disorder and how to fight back and get your life back.
Wow.
So, and then he started his own CBD oil company and a Fenway bags company. I mean, his entrepreneurship took off. And
so you had 3.5 really amazing years with him.
He did. And it was the first time really that I could breathe, because any family member knows dealing with somebody that they know has this disease, you never relax.
Well, and I always say I had 7 years of sleepless nights because my daughter started rebelling in high school and using weed and Xanax. And, that's when I started trying to bring her into line and trying to get her help, and nothing worked. And I never had the chance to have years of recovery or years of with her. She died so young. We were about to do an intervention and I didn't get that chance that you had. So I think it's horrible that you lost him. But nothing's going to change that. But I think those 3.5 years had to be somewhat of a gift for you.
An incredible gift. As a matter of fact, I look back and those 11.5 years from that accident, because technically he died twice during that accident. They just were able to bring him back. But I mean, he was flatlined. He bled out once. It was very, very scary time. So I do take great comfort that I did have those 11.5 years. When the pandemic hit, it ended up just in things that happened to be a perfect storm for Luke. First off, everyone was totally isolated. They could not have meetings. They hadn't figured Zoom out at first, couldn't meet at the beach. Luke had broken his hand, shattered the bone, so he couldn't golf. So the endorphins started to go down. He was preparing for a deposition. He had a malpractice suit against that filter. And his attorney told him, he said, we have to settle out of court, because the second the jury would hear that you're a drug addict, you're going to be in trouble. And sure enough, at his deposition, I mean, he was terrified of it. And the opposing attorney just attacked him time and time and time again, and he was shaken. Luckily, 3 weeks later, I had my term and I was prepared. So everything did work out well, but Luke was very shaken. So he went to a doctor to get some anti-anxiety medication. He had always had high anxiety as a child, always. Unfortunately, that started to cause a depression. In January, he was mildly rear-ended and he had back pain. He went to see a surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, who told him that the screws in his back were starting to impede upon his spinal cord. And Luke, I said, you might be paralyzed with the surgery, you might be paralyzed without it. Luke didn't have the insurance at the time. He was waiting for the insurance money to come in. But all of this caused him to cave one more time. I did not know this at the time. It was a short period of time, is what he told me. He found a good addictionologist who helped him try to get back on track. And he could get off the opioids, but getting off the benzos were very, very difficult for him. He asked to come home last summer and detox, and watching him one more time after all this success detox off of these drugs. I mean, the shaking, the quaking, the sweating, just the anguish. He managed to do it, and 3 weeks he was flying high. He was on Zoom meetings all the time with his AA group, and then I noticed the Zoom meetings ended. He and I were very close, and we could talk as adults at this time. And I asked him why, and he said, because my addictionologist let me take some Suboxone home with me just in case I needed it. And I need it. He said, Mom, the cravings are just really bad. When I get the money to come in, then I'm going to check myself into a treatment center. Because I offered again, and he said, you have paid for enough. I have things coming in, I will. But he could not, again, interact with his AA community because they consider being on Suboxone using. I'm not saying all do, but the ones that we came in contact with, and he was out in LA, they have 1,500 meetings a day out there, and he went to a great many of them. It just is not accepted. We had a wonderful rest of the summer. The Suboxone evened him out beautifully. He started to run out the last week. He told me he was using some of the kratom tea. Told him I didn't think that was a good idea. He said, listen, when I get home, I have an appointment. This will last me there. Angela, I dropped him off on Thursday at 3:30 in the afternoon. He called me Friday morning in a full-blown panic attack. He couldn't hear. He was dizzy. He couldn't walk. And I told him, honey, I think you have airplane ear, which throws everything off. And I said, call your doctor. He texted me back. He said, I can't get in till the end of the week. I said, go to a clinic. He said, I already tried. The lines are 3 hours long. And then he was quiet, which told me he went to the street. And at midnight on Friday, he was gone. He had contacted a friend. He had asked for Klonopin, and that is not what he got.
Off the street.
What he thought.
Right. What he thought was.
Right.
And it was fentanyl.
Right.
And how did you find out that he had died?
I had a feeling at about the time he died, something was terribly wrong.
Wow.
I almost felt this extreme anxiety come over me, and, don't know if I was awake or dreaming, but heard, Mom, I just had to show you what this felt like so you'd understand. I came to, I was paralyzed with fear. I tried contacting him the next day. He wouldn't get back with me. I kept on checking our accounts because we always use the same one. I could see he was always doing Uber Eats all the time. Sunday morning, I finally had the courage to do a welfare check. I think deep in my heart, I was hoping, because of his super high tolerance, and it was documented as one of the highest that Duke had ever seen, that he would survive it. They did a welfare check, and then I got that phone call that no parent ever wants to get. I'm sorry. There's no easy way to say this, but your son is deceased. When the inspector called back, he told me that Luke had passed away 32 hours earlier, which was just at that time.
Wow.
That I had that feeling.
I am
and
so
then I started
sorry.
screaming, of course.
Yeah. It's your brain isn't prepared to handle that kind of news, no matter what you've been through with your child.
No matter what.
Yeah. I am so sorry.
Thank you.
And he was 30 at the time.
He was 30. Yeah. And he had just been accepted into Harvard's, they have an extension school, which is something like UPenn's, because he had more ability to take poli-sci classes. What he wanted to do was to either get a master's in public policy or go on to become an attorney and to fight the opioid crisis. He had written many papers on it.
So how have you coped with your loss?
Living with it as long as I did, there was always that fear. You're never ready for it. And I had promised God years ago, if he got me through that first crisis when he was 17, that I would pay it forward. And I didn't know exactly what that meant. But after he passed away, it was almost as he told me, Mom, only the body dies. I'm here. I tried. Now it's up to you. Go out and serve. And 3 weeks after, I sat down at the computer and I started to write. And I wrote all of our story. It was very cathartic, but I also knew as I was writing this, I have so much information that parents need to know. There are no handbooks. What do you do when you find out or you suspect that your child has a problem? Where do you go? You have to know how to navigate some of these Google sites to really find out. The stigma is still so in place. I mean, can you imagine going into a hospital room and overhearing parents talking to their child who is bald and has chemo ports in them? Why are you doing this to us? Why are you so bad? No, they have a disease. And parents have to recognize that what they are dealing with is bioneurological changes in the brain. And when people start to detox, they're not going out to get high. They're going out. I mean, their brain thinks it's dying.
Right. It's the most important thing. It becomes more important than anything else in their life. Anything.
Well,
that substance.
I asked Luke once, I said, what does it feel like? And we have a little lake in the back of our house. And he said, Mom, let's say we're back out there and somebody pours kerosene on me and lights a match. I go up. He said, I got two choices. I can stand there and let that fire burn me up, or I can go and jump in the lake. He said, it is so painful. He said, every nerve fiber you have is on fire inside and out. That's why people go back to using it. So many people think it's just to go out and get high. No, they are feeling these withdrawals and they need to get away from the pain,
and what people need to understand too. And I've read a really enlightening article recently because I haven't experienced it myself, but it helped me understand that being dope sick isn't just like the flu, but it is like the worst thing that you could feel.
Yes.
You just really want some sort of relief.
Yes.
And you know how bad we feel when we have the flu,
right?
Right? And if you imagine the magnification of that, and it's also a psychic reaction as well, not just a physical one. I just don't think people really have a true concept of how difficult it is.
No.
And I didn't know,
No. And when they think of the word craving, they think like
chocolate.
Me and, chocolate,
Right.
No. I mean, I read one doctor's account. He said the brain actually think it's dying. And honestly, what's happening is the dopamine is so low that, it is just causing excruciating internal pain.
So tell me more about this book.
Well, it is done. I wrote my memoir, but I realized as I was doing it, I was just spilling things out. Even though I'm a professor and I do know how to write, I don't know how to write a novel, and I am too close to the topic to really unpack it. So I hired a wonderful professional editor out in Los Angeles. His name is Chaz Allen. And he has helped me develop it, move the chapters around, help me with the writing. And Luke also has a very close friend out in LA who is a Hollywood actor. He's moving his way up film by film. He's had quite a few on Lifetime. And he said, this needs to be turned into a movie because people need to see a story, and stories bring the points across. So we're at the point now where the proposal is done and we're out trying to find a good agent so we can find a good publishing house, and then the film and book can walk hand in hand. I kind of promised my higher power, I will write this and then I'll surrender it to you.
Yeah.
And you put the right people in my life. And Angela, I have to tell you, the people that have been coming in. I mean, one on your podcast, I listened to Dr. Gupta. I was just blown away because almost everything he had to say, yes, 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 that's what we experienced. That's why we could not get help.
Right.
He's helping in this project with advice, as an expert medical advisor. I want to give him another plug for his book. I mean, if anybody wants to make a documentary of this crisis, that book is an
well, and our listeners can go back. It's just a few episodes earlier. I think it was a couple months ago that I talked to Dr. Gupta, so they can go back and listen to. And then we have some links to his book as well if people are interested. But yeah, I agree that the right people. I felt that way with forming the charity and some of the work we're trying to do. The right people just keep showing up, and it's not. I mean, I'm putting in my own effort, but it's not because of that. It's just
right.
I feel like we're at a point, and just even you and I connecting, neither one of us can make the kinds of changes that we want to see alone.
No,
I mean, it is going to take everybody who's been impacted by this overdose epidemic coming together, not in competition, but joining hands, and shouting from all of our platforms, the
many
best that
big
we can.
Changes have come about by, just one person's experience that finds another. Mothers Against Drunk Driving is a great example. And unfortunately, since the politicians and the medical personnel don't seem to want to get on this bandwagon or really understand it, I think this has got to be a grassroots effort that continues to grow and get out there and really influence.
Politicians are talking about it now. And I was just listening to a committee meeting on this very issue not too long ago. And what struck me is they were all sharing that they'd all been touched by this, in either personally, or they had a family member or a friend who'd lost someone by substance use disorder or overdose or fentanyl poisoning. And I just thought, great, they're talking about it. But to me, they're not doing enough. They're not coming together in a bipartisan way to do enough yet.
Right. And even my MD, I mean, I told her, I was in to see her just a couple of weeks after Luke passed. And of course, she was very sorry for me. But her first reaction, Susan, we are doing so many things now that keep people from getting addicted by, how many drugs we can pass out. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, but what are you doing for the ones who have precursors and the ones who are already have the disease? And her face went blank. We've got to connect the dots here. There is no reason why doctors can pass out narcotics and they cannot prescribe Suboxone.
Right.
Obviously there's going to have to be training, but I mean,
and there's
it's
so
not
many
that hard.
And there's so many different fronts. I mean, your son may be alive had there not been fentanyl in the drug that he was getting.
Yes.
My daughter. I always say, if people were walking into a bar and putting fentanyl and alcohol and people were dropping over dead, what would we be doing in this country? But because it's obtained illegally, and I just think it's going to take more than law enforcement. It's such a huge problem.
Yeah. I mean, that obviously is a huge problem, but we have been trying to change or have this war on drugs by only having it going through law enforcement. Right. And like a doctor, one of his comments was, he said, it's like trying to fight World War II with the Coast Guard. The whole way on how we are going about this needs a huge overhaul. Yeah, and it needs to be patient-based, disease-based. That doesn't mean we stop, trying to track down, the opioids coming in, but for the people who already have the disease, they need good, healthy, strong options. And other countries have made a lot of progress on that. So, I mean,
I want you to come back on this podcast when you have news about the book and what's happening with it. Will you join me again?
I would love to.
Want to let everybody know about that and that it's available. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing Luke's story with us. And
thank you for inviting me. Truly. I finally getting some strength again to be able to stand up and do this. But if not for our kids, for who? This is in their memory, but also in their honor, the good people that they were, not buy into any kind of stigma.
Right. My daughter was an incredible person.
She looks like
who was ill.
Yeah.
And the same with Luke. I mean, what a great looking guy. And I think it just, one thing that we show the world, you and I, is that, and I got this a lot when this first happened to me, was like, oh, this can happen to anybody. This can happen in any family. Just some of these stigmatized ideas we have about who
absolutely
this can happen to. I think we're changing that in the
absolutely
hearts and minds of everybody.
Right. And unfortunately for a lot of parents, they keep that even though they know something's not right.
Right.
But to deal with that, they have to look at themselves first and say, I need to get over this stigma. I need to know it's a disease. I need to learn about it. I need to act so I can save my child.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Susan. I look forward to talking to you again in the future, near
future.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Check out other episodes of the podcast and read my blog on our website, emilyshope.foundation. If you like what you're hearing, please consider giving us a positive review where you listen to this podcast. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage.